The crystal palace floated in the darkness between two burning stars. Its walls caught the light from both suns and threw it back in waves of blue and gold. Inside the palace, Queen Velthara sat on her throne of living diamond. She had been sitting there for 3,000 years, and she would sit there for 3,000 more. The queen was old beyond counting. Her skin was pale like moonlight, and her eyes held the depth of space itself. She wore robes that seemed to be made from starlight, and her crown was cut from a single piece of frozen time. She ruled the Zephyrian Empire, which stretched across 12 galaxies and held 1 trillion worlds under its power. Today was different, though she could not say why at first. The throne room was filled with the usual crowd of nobles and servants. They all looked young compared to the queen, but each had lived for thousands of years. They spoke in whispers about trade routes and conquered planets, about art that took centuries to create, and about politics that moved as slowly as melting ice. Then Princess Lyrelith walked into the room, and everything changed. The princess was the queen's daughter, born 800 years ago. She looked like her mother, but younger, with the same pale skin and deep eyes. Her hair was silver like starlight, and she moved with the grace that came from having forever to learn how to walk perfectly. But something was wrong. The queen could see it right away. Her daughter's eyes were different. They held something new, something the queen had never seen before in any immortal face. It looked almost like sadness, but that could not be right. Immortals did not feel sadness the way short-lived creatures did. "Mother," Lyrelith said as she approached the throne. She bowed her head in the proper way, but even this seemed different, less formal, more human. "Daughter," the queen replied, "you have returned from the outer sectors. How did you find the barbarian worlds?" The nobles around them stopped talking. They always enjoyed hearing about the strange creatures that lived in the dark edges of the empire. The short-lived beings who died before they could learn anything useful. The ones who lived for just a few decades and then vanished like sparks. "I found them remarkable," Lyrelith said. The throne room became very quiet. Remarkable was not a word immortals used to describe mortals. Useful, perhaps. Interesting in the way an insect might be interesting. But remarkable? That was a word saved for immortal achievements, for things that lasted. "Remarkable?" the queen asked. Her voice carried the weight of ages. "In what way?" Lyrelith looked around the room at all the watching faces. The nobles leaned forward, waiting for her to say something properly dismissive about the mortal creatures. But instead she did something that shocked everyone. She smiled. Not the cold, perfect smile of an immortal, but something warm and sad and beautiful all at once. "They burn so brightly," she said. "In their short lives, they achieve things we have never imagined. They love with a passion we cannot understand. They create beauty that makes me weep." Several nobles gasped. An immortal admitting to tears? Over mortals? This was beyond unusual. This was almost heretical. The queen studied her daughter's face. "You speak strangely, child. What has changed you?" "I lived among them for 50 years, Lyrelith said. "I learned their ways. I saw how they spend their brief time." 50 years is nothing," said Lord Kethrin, one of the oldest nobles. "We spend 50 years deciding what to have for breakfast." "Exactly," Lyrelith said, and her voice carried a new strength. "For us, 50 years is a blink. For them it might be most of a lifetime, so they make every day count. Every hour, every moment." The queen felt something stir in her ancient heart. Curiosity. She had not felt truly curious about anything for a very long time. "Tell me more about these mortals. What did they teach you that we do not already know?" "They taught me about urgency," Lyrelith said. "About making choices that matter because time is running out. About loving someone so much that losing them breaks your heart, but loving them anyway because the love is worth the pain." "Pain is weakness," said Lady Sylvana, another ancient noble. "We evolved beyond such things long ago. Did we?" Lyrelith asked. "Or did we just become too afraid to feel anything real?" The nobles began to murmur among themselves. This kind of talk was dangerous. It questioned everything their civilization was built on: the superiority of immortals, the weakness of mortal creatures, the natural order of the universe. But the queen held up her hand for silence. She was more curious than ever now. "You speak as if these mortals taught you something we lack," she said. "What could creatures who die in mere decades possibly teach beings who have lived for millennia?" Lyrelith's smile grew sadder. "They taught me how to live, Mother. Really live, not just exist. Explain. When you have forever, there is no reason to hurry. No reason to take risks. No reason to love deeply or create passionately or fight for what you believe in. After all, you can always do it tomorrow. Or next century. Or next millennium. The Queen nodded slowly. This was true. Immortals rarely felt urgent about anything. But when you have only a short time, Lyrillith continued, every choice matters. Every day is precious. Every person you love might be taken from you, so you hold them tighter. Every dream you have must be chased now because later might never come. This sounds exhausting, said Lord Catherine. It is, Lyrillith agreed. It is also wonderful. I have felt more alive in 50 years among mortals than in 800 years among immortals. The Queen leaned forward on her throne. Who taught you these things? Which of these mortals influenced you so greatly? Lyrillith's expression changed. The sadness in her eyes deepened, but so did something else. Love. Loss. A pain so deep it made some of the nobles step back in surprise. Her name was Elena. The princess said quietly. Dr. Elena Vasquez. She was a human scientist studying how different species experience time. Was? The Queen asked, catching the past tense. She died 6 months ago, Lyrillith said, and now there was no hiding the grief in her voice. Her species only lives for about 80 years. She was 57 when I met her. She knew she was dying even faster than most humans. A disease in her blood. She had perhaps 2 years left. The throne room was completely silent now. No immortal could imagine knowing they would die, much less accepting it with grace. And yet, Lyrillith continued, in those 2 years, she accomplished more than most of us do in centuries. She found a way to extend human life. She helped thousands of people. She taught me that death is not the enemy of life, but its greatest teacher. The Queen stared at her daughter. In all her thousands of years, she had never heard an immortal speak with such passion about anything, least of all about mortality. This Elena, the Queen said slowly. She was more than your teacher, was she not? Lyrillith nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She was my mortal mother. I loved her, and she loved me. And losing her taught me something no amount of immortal wisdom ever could. What did it teach you? That love without the possibility of loss is just possession. That life without the threat of death is just existence. That meaning comes not from having forever, but from making the most of whatever time you have. The Queen sat back in her throne, her mind racing. Her daughter had changed completely. Where once she had been like all immortals, distant and cold and perfect, now she burned with something new, something mortal, something beautiful. I am curious about this, Elena, the Queen said at last. I wish to learn more about her and her kind. I hoped you would say that, Lyrillith said, because I think it is time our people learned what mortals have to teach us. The nobles erupted in protests, but the Queen silenced them with a look. Her curiosity was stronger than their objections. For the first time in millennia, she wanted to understand something new. She wanted to meet these remarkable mortals who had taught her daughter how to truly live. The memory came to Lyrillith as clearly as if it were happening again. She closed her eyes and let herself remember the day she first saw Elena Vasquez. Haven's Edge was not a beautiful planet. The human colony sat on the edge of a red dwarf star, its buildings low and practical. The sky was always a dull orange and the air smelled of metal and growing things. It was nothing like the crystal palaces and perfect gardens of the immortal worlds. Lyrillith had come there as part of a routine inspection. The Zephyrian Empire liked to check on its mortal subjects every few decades, making sure they were following the rules and paying their taxes. It was boring work, usually given to young immortals who needed to learn about the Empire. She had expected to spend a few days reading reports and listening to local officials explain their problems. She had not expected to find the human research station. Dr. Elena Vasquez was working in a small laboratory built into the side of a hill. The building was simple, made of concrete and steel with big windows that looked out over the colony. Inside, it was filled with computers and machines that hummed softly in the background. Elena was bent over a microscope when Lyrillith first saw her. She was a small woman with dark hair turning gray at the edges. Her hands moved quickly and surely over her instruments. She wore simple clothes, a white coat over dark pants, nothing like the flowing robes of immortal nobles. Dr. Vasquez? Lyrillith had said, reading from her official pad. I am Princess Lyrillith of the Zephyrian Empire. I am here to review your research permit. Elena had looked up from her microscope and Lyrillith felt something strange happen. The human's eyes were brown, warm like earth, and they held an intelligence that seemed to burn. But more than that, they held something Lyrillith had never seen before in a mortal's gaze. They held no fear. Most mortals were terrified of immortals. They stammered and bowed and tried to hide their thoughts. But Elena just smiled and said, "Your Highness, I was wondering when someone would come to check on me." "You were expecting an inspection?" Lyrillith asked. "I've been studying temporal perception in different species for 3 years," Elena said, standing and wiping her hands on a small towel. "That's the kind of research that makes governments nervous. How different beings experience time, how it affects their choices, their cultures, their entire way of thinking." Lyrillith found herself interested despite her usual boredom with mortal concerns. "And what have you discovered?" Elena's smile grew wider. "That immortals and mortals live in completely different universes, even when we're standing in the same room." This was not what Lyrillith had expected to hear. She set down her official pad and really looked at the human woman for the first time. "Explain." "Time is everything," Elena said, moving to a large screen on the wall. With a few touches, she brought up a series of charts and graphs. "For your people, a year is like a second. You can afford to wait, to plan for centuries, to let things happen slowly. But for us, a year is huge. It's enough time to fall in love, have a child, write a book, change everything." "This makes mortals impulsive and short-sighted," Lyrillith said, repeating what she had been taught. "Does it?" Elena asked. She touched the screen again and new images appeared. Pictures of human achievements. Art, music, literature, scientific discoveries. Or does it make us focused? When you know your time is limited, you don't waste it. You make choices that matter. Lyrillith stared at the images. She had seen mortal art before, but always dismissed it as crude and temporary. Now, seeing it through Elena's eyes, she noticed something different. There was an intensity to it, a passion that immortal art lacked. "Why do you study this?" Lyrillith asked. Elena's smile faded a little. "Because I want to understand how to make the most of the time we have. All of us. Mortals and immortals alike." "You think immortals need to learn from mortals?" "I think everyone has something to teach everyone else," Elena said simply. "Even a princess and a dying scientist." "Dying?" The word came out before Lyrillith could stop it. Elena nodded calmly. "I have a genetic condition. My blood doesn't carry oxygen properly. It gets worse over time. I have maybe 2 years left if I'm lucky." Lyrillith felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had known mortals died, of course, but it had always been abstract. She had never met one who knew when it would happen. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Every day," Elena said. "But fear isn't the enemy. Fear can motivate you to do important things while you still can." "What important things are you doing?" Elena's eyes lit up. "I'm trying to understand how different species can work together better. How we can share knowledge across the gap between mortal and immortal perspectives. And I'm working on extending human lifespan, not to make us immortal, but to give us more time to grow and learn and love." Lyrillith found herself sitting down without permission. This human woman spoke about death as casually as an immortal might discuss the weather. But more than that, she spoke about her work with a passion that Lyrillith had never heard from anyone. "Why do you care about extending human life if you cannot save yourself?" Lyrillith asked. "Because it's not about me," Elena said. "It's about all the humans who come after me, all the discoveries they'll make, the art they'll create, the love they'll share. I may not live to see it, but I can help make it possible." This was a completely new idea to Lyrillith. Immortals worked for themselves, for their own glory or advancement. The idea of working for people you would never meet, benefits you would never see, was strange and beautiful. "I would like to understand your research better," Lyrillith heard herself saying. "Really?" Elena looked surprised. "It could take weeks to explain properly. I have time." And so began the most important weeks of Lyrillith's life. Elena was a patient teacher and a brilliant scientist. She showed Lyrillith how human brains work differently when they knew time was limited. How the pressure of mortality made humans more creative, more willing to take risks, more capable of deep love. But more than the science, Lyrillith learned about Elena herself. The human woman worked 16 hours a day, driven by the knowledge that each day might be her last good day. She had friends throughout the colony who came to her for advice, for comfort, for the simple joy of her company. She had dedicated her life to helping others. Even though no one could help her, and slowly, carefully, She and Lyrillith became friends. It started with scientific discussions over simple meals in Elena's small quarters. Elena would cook food from her home planet Earth, strange dishes with bold flavors that immortals never bothered with. They would talk about time and memory, about the differences between species, about what it meant to truly live. "You immortals have everything we want," Elena said one evening as they watched the orange sunset through her window, "all the time in the universe. But I think you've forgotten how to use it." "How do you mean? When was the last time you felt urgent about something? When did you last take a risk because you couldn't bear to wait? When did you love someone so much it scared you?" Lyrillith thought about it and realized she had never done any of those things. Immortals didn't feel urgency, they didn't take unnecessary risks, and they certainly didn't love in ways that brought pain. "Never," she admitted. "That's what I thought," Elena said gently. "You have forever, so you think you can always do things later. But later never comes, does it? You just keep waiting. What should we do instead? Live like you might die tomorrow. Love like your heart might break. Work like the universe depends on you getting it right." As the weeks turned into months, Lyrillith found herself changing. Elena's passion for life was contagious. The way the human woman attacked each day with joy and determination made Lyrillith want to feel that way too. And somewhere along the way, friendship became something deeper. It happened slowly, so slowly that neither of them noticed at first. But Elena's warmth melted something in Lyrillith that had been frozen for centuries. And Lyrillith's gentle strength gave Elena comfort in her darkest moments when the disease made her weak and afraid. They never spoke of it directly. Elena was dying and Lyrillith was immortal. What future could they have? But love didn't ask for a future. Love existed in the present moment, burning bright and beautiful and real. For the first time in her 800 years of life, Lyrillith understood what it meant to be truly alive. And it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. But even as love bloomed between them, Elena's disease grew stronger. The time they had together was running out, and both of them knew it. Elena faced each day with courage, but Lyrillith was learning what mortals meant when they talked about heartbreak. How could anything be worth this pain? How could love be beautiful when it led to such loss? Elena had an answer for that too, as she did for everything. But Lyrillith would not understand it until much later, when the pain had taught her what Elena's words could not. Queen Valthera had listened to her daughter's story with growing fascination. Now as Lyrillith stood before the throne with tears still fresh on her cheeks, the ancient ruler felt something she had not experienced in millennia. She wanted to understand more. "Tell me about Elena's final days," the queen commanded, though her voice was gentler than usual. Around them, the nobles shifted uncomfortably. They were not used to their queen showing such interest in mortal affairs. Lyrillith took a deep breath, gathering her strength to speak of painful memories. "Elena knew she was dying faster than we had hoped," the princess began. "The disease was winning. Her body was failing. But her mind remained sharp until the very end. She used every moment she had left to finish her research." "What kind of research?" asked the queen. "She was developing a treatment that could extend human lifespan by 30 years. Not immortality, but enough extra time for humans to achieve more, to love deeper, to pass on more wisdom to their children." Lyrillith's voice grew stronger as she spoke of Elena's work. She also wrote detailed studies about how immortal and mortal societies could learn from each other. Lord Kethrin scoffed. "What could mortals possibly teach us?" "Everything," Lyrillith said firmly. "Elena showed me that we immortals have become lazy. We have forever, so we never hurry. We never feel passion the way mortals do. We never fight for anything because we think we can always fight tomorrow." "Fighting is for the weak," said Lady Sylvana. "We are above such crude emotions, are we?" Lyrillith asked. "Or are we just afraid?" Elena was afraid every day, but she didn't let fear stop her. She used it to push herself to do more, to be better, to help others while she still could. Queen Valthera raised her hand for silence. "Continue your story, daughter. What did Elena teach you in her final days?" Lyrillith closed her eyes, remembering. "She taught me that endings give meaning to everything that came before. Without death, life has no weight. Without loss, love has no value. Without time limits, choices don't matter." The throne room was completely quiet now. Even the nobles who had been whispering among themselves had stopped to listen. Elena spent her last weeks not mourning what she was losing, but celebrating what she had gained. She spoke about the friends she had made, the discoveries she had completed, the love we had shared. She said that knowing our time together was limited made every moment more precious. But surely she was bitter about dying so young, asked the Queen. No, Lyrillith said, and her voice filled with wonder. She was grateful. Grateful for the time she had. Grateful for the work she had been able to do. Grateful even for the disease that had taught her not to waste a single day. Several nobles gasped at this. The idea of being grateful for suffering was completely foreign to their immortal minds. On her last day, Lyrillith continued, Elena called me to her bedside. She could barely speak, but her eyes were still bright with intelligence and love. She gave me a small device, a recording she had made for me. What did she say? Lyrillith reached into her robes and pulled out a small silver object. It was clearly human technology, simple and functional compared to immortal devices. May I play it for you, Mother? The Queen nodded. Lyrillith touched the device, and suddenly Elena's voice filled the throne room. It was weak but clear, with an accent that marked her as being from Earth. My dearest Lyrillith, the recording began. If you are listening to this, then I am gone, and you are grieving. I know how hard this must be for you. Your people don't experience loss the way mine do. But I want you to understand something important. The Queen leaned forward, fascinated by the sound of this mortal woman who had so changed her daughter. Death is not a failure, Elena's voice continued. It is not something to be overcome or defeated. Death is what gives life meaning. Because we can lose everything, everything becomes precious. Because our time is limited, we must choose carefully how to spend it. You have forever, my love, but I hope I have taught you not to waste it. Don't spend eternity just existing. Live every day as if it matters, because it does. Love deeply even though love can hurt. Fight for what you believe in even though you might fail. Create something beautiful even though it might be destroyed. Several nobles were now openly staring. They had never heard anyone speak this way about death. I am not sad to die, Elena said, and her voice grew stronger. I am grateful to have lived. I am grateful for the work I did, the people I helped, the love I shared with you. My life was short, but it was full. That is all any of us can ask for. I want you to take what I taught you back to your people. Show them what mortals know about living. Help them understand that immortality without purpose is just emptiness. Time without meaning is just waiting. The Queen felt something strange happening in her chest, a tightness, a pressure she had not felt for thousands of years. And remember this, my immortal princess. Elena's voice said softly, I may be gone, but what we shared will last forever. Love doesn't die when the lover dies. It becomes part of who you are. Take my love with you and use it to love others. Take my passion for life and use it to really live. This is my gift to you and to your people. The knowledge that meaning comes not from time, but from how we use the time we have. Goodbye, my love. Make your forever count. The recording ended and the throne room was silent except for the soft sound of Lyrillith crying. Queen Valthara sat motionless on her throne for a long moment. Then she stood, something she rarely did during court sessions. The nobles immediately bowed, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at her daughter. This Elena, the Queen said slowly. She spoke like no mortal I have ever heard of. She was extraordinary, Lyrillith said. But she was not unique. Humans live this way all the time. They love knowing they will lose what they love. They work knowing their work might outlast them. They sacrifice for people they will never meet. And you believe we should learn from this? I believe we must learn from this, Lyrillith said with new firmness. We have ruled over mortals for millennia, thinking ourselves superior because we live forever. But what have we achieved with our immortality? We create art that takes centuries to complete and says nothing important. We make plans that span millennia but accomplish nothing meaningful. We live forever, but we don't really live at all. The Queen walked down from her throne and stood before her daughter. For the first time in Lyrillith's memory, they were the same height. Show me, the Queen said. What do you mean? Show me these humans who taught you such things.
I want to meet them myself.
I want to understand what Elena understood. I want to see if an ancient immortal can learn to truly live. The nobles erupted in protest. Your Majesty, Lord Catherine said. Surely you don't mean to lower yourself by visiting mortal worlds. I mean exactly that, the Queen said, turning to face her court. My daughter has shown me something I did not know existed. A way of thinking, a way of being that might teach us things we never imagined. But they are so primitive, Lady Sylvana said. So short-lived and crude. Are they? The Queen asked. Or are we so ancient and set in our ways that we have forgotten how to grow? She turned back to Lyrolith. Arrange for us to visit human space. I want to see these remarkable mortals for myself. I want to understand what Elena Vasquez understood about life and death and love. You won't be disappointed, Lyrolith said, smiling through her tears. I hope not, the Queen replied, because if these mortals can teach an immortal princess how to live, perhaps they can teach an immortal queen as well. As the court buzzed with shocked whispers, Queen Valthera made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She would go among mortals not as a ruler, but as a student. She would learn what Elena had tried to teach about making time meaningful. For the first time in millennia, the ancient queen felt truly curious about something new. And that curiosity would transform everything. 3 weeks later, Queen Valthera stood on the bridge of a simple transport ship, looking out at the blue and green world that humans called Earth. She had left her crystal palace and her immortal court behind, traveling in disguise as Ambassador Vel, a minor diplomatic official sent to review human colonies. Lyrolith stood beside her, watching her mother take in the sight of humanity's birth world. The Queen had changed her appearance for this journey. Gone were the flowing robes of starlight and the crown of frozen time. Instead, she wore simple gray clothes that would not draw attention. Her hair was darker, her skin less pale, her eyes less deep with the weight of ages. It's so small, the Queen said softly. Most human worlds are, Lyrolith replied. They don't build crystal palaces that span star systems. They build homes that can last a few generations, and they call that immortality. The transport ship landed in a city called Geneva, on the shores of a lake surrounded by ancient mountains. The Queen had never seen mountains before. On immortal worlds, they flattened landscapes or built them from scratch. These mountains were wild and uncontrolled, shaped by forces beyond anyone's command. They're beautiful, she said, surprising herself. Their first stop was the Elena Vasquez Research Institute, built in Elena's honor after her death. It was a modest building made of glass and steel, nothing like the grand academies of immortal worlds. But inside, the Queen found something she had never seen before: humans working with desperate intensity. Dr. James Chen, Elena's former colleague, met them at the entrance. He was a man in his 40s with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly from too much caffeine. He had been working on Elena's research for the 6 months since her death. Ambassador Vel, he said, shaking the Queen's hand in the strange human custom. Princess Lyrolith told us you were interested in Dr. Vasquez's work. Very interested, the Queen said, studying his face. Like Elena, this human showed no fear of her, even though he didn't know who she really was. Tell me about what you're doing here. Dr. Chen led them through laboratories filled with humans bent over microscopes and computers. Everyone moved quickly, talking in excited voices about their discoveries. The Queen had never seen such energy in any workplace. Elena's breakthrough was understanding how genetic aging works at the cellular level, Dr. Chen explained. She found a way to slow down the process without stopping it completely. The treatment could give humans an extra 30 to 40 years of healthy life. Why continue her work after she died? The Queen asked. Dr. Chen stopped walking and looked at her with surprise. Why wouldn't we? This research could help billions of people. Just because Elena can't see the results doesn't mean the results don't matter. This was the same thing Elena had said in her recording. Work for benefits you'll never see. The Queen found it as strange now as she had then. They spent the morning watching human scientists work. The Queen noticed how they shared information freely, how they built on each other's discoveries, how they pushed themselves to work long hours because they knew their time was limited. It was completely different from immortal research, which moved slowly and was often kept secret for centuries. Dr. Martinez over there, Dr. Chen said, pointing to a young woman with short black hair. She's 28 years old. She knows she only has maybe 50 years of productive research time left, so she works like every day counts. Because it does count? Exactly. Elena taught us that urgency isn't stress, it's focus. When you know your time is limited, you don't waste it on unimportant things. Their next stop was a human school, where children learned about the world around them. The Queen watched 6-year-olds painting pictures with bright colors and wild imagination. Their teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was 63 years old and had been teaching for 40 years. "Why do you continue teaching when you could retire?" the Queen asked her during a break between classes. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Because these children need someone to help them discover who they can become. I may not live to see what they accomplish, but I can give them the tools to accomplish it." "You don't find it sad that you won't see their full lives?" "I find it wonderful that I get to see the beginning," Mrs. Patterson said. "Every child I teach carries a little bit of me forward into the future. That's better than immortality." The Queen spent the afternoon watching the children play. They laughed with abandon. They cried when they fell down. They made friends and enemies and forgave each other all in the space of an hour. Everything they did was intense and immediate and real. "They don't know how to be bored," the Queen observed to Lyrillith. "Humans rarely are bored," her daughter replied. "They don't have time for it." That evening they attended a concert in the city center. A human woman named Sarah Bright was performing songs she had written about loss and love and hope. The Queen had heard immortal music before, complex compositions that took decades to perform and centuries to truly understand. But this human music was different. It was simple. It was emotional. It was honest. Sarah sang about losing her father to illness, about falling in love with her wife, about raising children in an uncertain world. Her voice cracked with emotion, and several people in the audience cried openly. The Queen felt that strange tightness in her chest again. After the concert, they met Sarah backstage. She was a small woman with gray hair and calloused hands from playing guitar for 30 years. "What inspires your music?" the Queen asked her. "Life," Sarah said simply. "All of it. The joy, the pain, the fear, the love. Humans don't live long enough to waste time pretending we don't feel things. But your songs are about loss, about pain. Why choose such sad subjects?" Sarah smiled. "Because pain makes the joy more precious. Because loss teaches us to appreciate what we have while we have it. Because sadness and happiness aren't opposites. They're partners." The Queen didn't understand this, but she filed it away to think about later. Their final stop was a human hospital, where people came when they were sick or dying. The Queen expected to find despair and hopelessness. Instead, she found something remarkable. Dr. Elizabeth Santos ran the terminal care ward, where humans came to spend their final days. She was 55 years old and had been caring for dying people for 20 years. "Doesn't it depress you to work with death every day?" the Queen asked her. "It teaches me about life every day," Dr. Santos replied. "When people know they're dying, they stop pretending about what matters. They focus on love, on family, on the mark they want to leave on the world. Death strips away everything false and leaves only what's real." She took them to meet some of her patients. Tom Bradley was 81 years old and dying of cancer. He spent his days writing letters to his grandchildren about the lessons he had learned in life. Maria Gonzalez was 67 and had perhaps a week left. She was teaching her daughter how to make the family's traditional bread recipes. "Why aren't they angry?" the Queen asked Dr. Santos privately. "Why aren't they fighting death with all their strength?" "Some do fight," Dr. Santos said. "But the wisest ones learn that death isn't the enemy. Meaninglessness is the enemy. Wasted time is the enemy. Death is just the end of the story. What matters is making sure the story is worth telling." That night, back in their hotel room, Queen Valthera sat by the window looking out at the human city. Lights twinkled in thousands of windows, each one representing a human life burning briefly but brightly. "I begin to understand," she told Lyrillith. "These mortals know something we have forgotten." "What's that?" "How to live like their lives matter. How to love knowing they will lose what they love. How to work for futures they will not see. How to find meaning in endings," Lyrillith smiled. "Elena would be proud to hear you say that." "I want to meet more of them," the Queen said. "I want to understand how this perspective could change our people. Are you ready for that change?" The Queen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I think our immortal civilization has been sleeping for millennia. These mortals might be exactly what we need to wake us up." Outside their window, the human city continued its brief, bright dance of life. And for the first time in her endless existence, Queen Valthera understood what Elena Vasquez had meant about making time meaningful. 6 months after returning from Earth, Queen Valthera stood once again in her crystal palace. But everything had changed. The throne room that had once felt eternal and perfect now felt cold and empty. The immortal nobles who had once seemed wise and dignified now seemed frozen in time, afraid to feel anything real. The Queen had called a gathering of the most powerful immortals in the Empire. Representatives from all 12 galaxies had come, curious about the strange reports they had been hearing. Their ancient ruler was speaking of mortals as if they were equals. She was proposing changes that would shake the very foundations of immortal society. "My fellow immortals," the Queen began, her voice carrying across the vast throne room. "For 10,000 years we have ruled this empire believing ourselves superior to the mortal races under our protection. We have lived above them, apart from them, convinced that our immortality made us better than those who face death." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was not how their queen usually spoke. "I have learned that we were wrong," she continued. "Not wrong about our power, not wrong about our abilities, but wrong about what makes life valuable." Lord Admiral Zenthos, ruler of the 6th galaxy, stepped forward. He was ancient even by immortal standards, having lived for 15,000 years. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "surely you do not suggest that mortals are our equals." "I suggest that in some ways they are our superiors," the Queen replied. Shocked gasps echoed through the chamber. Several nobles looked as if they might faint. "Let me tell you what I learned on Earth," the Queen said, raising her voice. "I met a teacher named Mrs. Patterson who had spent 40 years helping children learn to read. She knew she would never see what those children accomplished as adults, but she taught them anyway because she believed in their potential. I met a doctor named Elizabeth Santos who spent every day watching people die, but who called her work a privilege because she helped them die with dignity and meaning. I met a scientist named James Chen, who worked 16 hours a day continuing research started by a dead colleague, because he believed that knowledge belonged to everyone, not just to its discoverer." Princess Lyrillith stood beside her mother's throne, watching the faces of the assembled immortals. She could see confusion, fear, and anger in their expressions, but in a few faces she thought she saw something else: curiosity. "These mortals," the Queen continued, "accomplish more in their brief lives than we achieve in millennia. They love more deeply, work more passionately, and care more genuinely than we have ever dared to do. But they die," protested Lady Duchess Marilith from the 3rd galaxy. "Everything they do is temporary." "Yes," the Queen agreed, "and that is what gives their actions meaning. When you know your time is limited, you don't waste it. When you know you can lose what you love, you hold it more tightly. When you know your work must be passed on to others, you make sure it's worth passing on." She stood from her throne, something that always commanded attention. "I am announcing today the creation of the Elena Vasquez Institute for Mortal-Immortal Exchange," the Queen declared, "named for the human scientist who first taught my daughter these truths. This institute will facilitate learning between our peoples. Immortals will study mortal societies and mortals will share their knowledge with us." The throne room erupted in protests. "This is madness," shouted Lord Catherine. "We cannot lower ourselves to learn from beings who live mere decades." "Can we not?" the Queen asked. "In our arrogance we have stagnated. When did any of you last create something truly new? When did you last feel passionate about a cause? When did you last love someone so much that losing them would break your heart?" The nobles fell silent. None of them could answer those questions. "I thought so," the Queen said sadly. "We have confused immortality with wisdom, permanence with value. We have forgotten how to truly live." Lord Admiral Zenthos stepped forward again. "What exactly do you propose, Your Majesty?" "Exchange programs. Immortal volunteers will live among mortal populations, learning their ways, understanding their perspectives. Mortal scholars and scientists will visit our worlds, sharing their knowledge and their unique viewpoint." "And you believe this will benefit our empire?" "I believe it will save our empire," the Queen said firmly. "We have become a civilization of statues, beautiful but lifeless. The mortals can teach us how to become living beings again." Over the following weeks, the Queen worked tirelessly to establish the exchange program. Many immortals resisted, calling it degrading and unnecessary. But others, particularly the younger ones who had grown bored with eternal existence, volunteered eagerly. Princess Lyrillith became the first official immortal ambassador to humanity. She returned to Earth carrying Elena's research and her message of meaningful existence. She worked with human scientists to establish joint research projects, combining immortal knowledge with mortal urgency. Dr. James Chen was among the first humans to visit the immortal worlds. His reaction was not what the Queen had expected. "You're all so sad," he told her after a week in the Crystal Palace. "You have everything anyone could want. Unlimited time, incredible technology, perfect health. But you've forgotten how to be happy." "Explain," the Queen said. "Happiness comes from growth, from challenge, from working toward something important. You've eliminated all challenge from your lives. You've made everything perfect, so nothing feels special anymore." This insight struck the Queen like a physical blow. It was true. She could not remember the last time she had felt genuine happiness about anything. "What do you suggest?" "Learn to take risks again," Dr. Chen said. "Set goals that matter. Work for things bigger than yourselves. And most importantly, learn to feel time pressure again." Time pressure? Artificial deadlines. Choose projects and say, "This must be completed in 1 year," instead of "We'll work on it for centuries." You'll be amazed how much more you can accomplish. The Queen decided to try this herself. She set a goal of completely reorganizing the Empire's educational system within 2 years. For the first time in millennia, she felt the pressure of a deadline. To her amazement, it felt wonderful. As months passed, reports came in from immortals living among mortals and mortals visiting immortal worlds. The exchanges were changing both peoples in unexpected ways. Immortal artists who had spent centuries perfecting single works began creating bold, emotional pieces inspired by human passion. Immortal scientists started collaborating instead of working in isolation for decades. Even immortal nobles began taking interest in the welfare of their mortal subjects instead of simply ruling over them. Meanwhile, humans exposed to immortal technology and knowledge began thinking on larger scales. They started planning for centuries instead of decades, considering the long-term consequences of their actions. The combination of human urgency and immortal perspective created innovations neither species had achieved alone. But perhaps the most significant change came in how both species viewed death and loss. Immortals, who had always seen death as a failure to be avoided, began to understand it as a natural part of existence that gave life meaning. Some even chose to limit their own lifespans, living for only a few thousand years instead of indefinitely, so they could experience the intensity that came with knowing their time was finite. Humans, exposed to immortal wisdom about the long view, began to worry less about their short lives, and more about the legacy they would leave behind. They started thinking about how their actions would affect future generations centuries ahead. 1 year after establishing the Elena Vasquez Institute, Queen Valthera held another gathering in her throne room. This time, both immortals and humans attended. The Crystal Palace had been redesigned to be more welcoming, with warm colors and comfortable spaces instead of cold perfection. "My friends," the Queen began, addressing both species equally, "we have learned something remarkable this year. Immortals and mortals are not opposites. We are complementary. Your urgency and our patience, your passion and our wisdom, your acceptance of endings and our perspective on beginnings." Dr. James Chen stood to address the gathering. Elena Vasquez dreamed of a universe where different species could learn from each other, instead of fearing each other. Where mortality and immortality could work together instead of being in conflict. Her dream is becoming reality, Princess Lyrelith added. "The research stations we've established together have made breakthroughs neither species could achieve alone. The art we're creating combines immortal technique with mortal emotion. The societies we're building honor both the need for stability and the need for change." Queen Valthara smiled as she looked out over the mixed crowd of immortals and humans. For the first time in her ancient existence, she felt hope about the future. Elena Vasquez was right, she said. "It is not the length of life that matters, but the depth of living. Immortals, we have learned from mortals how to make our eternal existence meaningful. And mortals, you have learned from us how to think beyond your brief years." She paused, thinking of the recording Elena had left behind. "My mortal teacher is gone," the Queen continued, "but her wisdom lives on in all of us. She taught us that endings give meaning to beginnings, that love is stronger when it faces loss, and that the most important question is not how long we live, but how well we live."